Welcome to Crime Bull Podcast, where it's true crime, no bull. It's Bill and Jill with another shocking story. Make sure you like and subscribe. Let's solve some crime. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a case that's both heartbreaking and baffling. The death of Naa Dromor Adjei in Cincinnati, Ohio. Naa's story is a chilling example of the dangers of drug-facilitated crimes, a threat that sadly seems to be increasing, especially for women.
Yeah, it's a case that really underscores the vulnerability we all face when we're out in public, trusting that we're safe. The idea of someone being drugged without their knowledge is terrifying, and Na's case highlights just how difficult it can be to get justice in these situations.
Okay, so let's get into the details of Naa's story. She was just 24 years old, a real go-getter with a passion for the beauty industry. She had her own online business, worked as a cosmetologist, and was even training to become a pharmacy technician, all while being a vibrant presence on social media, sharing her love for beauty and her infectious personality with the world.
It's that stark contrast, the vibrancy of her life versus the tragic and sudden end that makes this case so impactful. It shatters the illusion that these crimes only happen to a certain type of person or in specific situations. It reminds us that this could happen to anyone, anywhere.
And it makes you wonder, how could this happen to someone like Naa? Someone so full of life and ambition. On October 17, 2019, Naa went out on a date that ended up being her last. And this is where the mystery really deepens. The person she was with has never been identified.
That's right. Despite the fact that this likely happened in a public setting, there were no witnesses who came forward, no one who could provide any information about the person Na was with that night. It's like he vanished into thin air.
That's incredibly disturbing. How can someone just disappear after being seen with another person in public? It makes you question everything you think you know about safety.
And this lack of information is a major obstacle in the investigation. Without knowing who she was with, it's almost impossible to piece together what happened to Na.
Right. And then there's the cause of death. Drugging. Oh. It sends chills down your spine to think that someone could slip something into your drink without you knowing, turning a fun night out into a nightmare.
Absolutely. We hear about date rape drugs like Rohypnol, GHB, and ketamine, but it's easy to dismiss them as urban legends. But the reality is they're out there and they're incredibly dangerous. They're often colorless, odorless, and tasteless, making them virtually undetectable when mixed into a drink.
So someone could be drugged without even realizing it. That's terrifying.
Exactly. And the effects of these drugs are devastating. They can cause memory loss, confusion, and even unconsciousness, leaving the victim vulnerable and unable to recall what happened. It's a perpetrator's dream scenario. The victim can't remember, and there's no evidence.
Which brings us to the really frustrating part. Prosecuting these crimes. If these drugs were so hard to detect, how do you even begin to build a case?
That's one of the biggest challenges in cases like Na's. These substances metabolize quickly, meaning they break down in the body rapidly, making them difficult to detect in toxicology tests, especially if time has passed.
So even if traces of the drug are found, it doesn't necessarily mean the victim was drugged against their will, right?
Unfortunately, that's correct. Establishing that crucial link, proving that the drugging was non-consensual and directly related to the crime is incredibly difficult, and that's where many of these cases fall apart.
It makes you realize how much the legal system is playing catch-up with the realities of these crimes. We're talking about substances designed to incapacitate and erase memories, and the burden of proof is still so high.
It's a huge problem, and that's why it's so important to understand the science behind these drugs, the legal challenges, and the societal factors that contribute to the prevalence of these crimes.
So where does that leave us with Naa's case? What's been done to try and get justice for her?
Well, Nae's death sparked a wave of grief and anger in her community. Her family and friends have been tirelessly using social media to keep her story alive and demand answers. It's led to increased calls for safety measures in bars and restaurants, like drink covers and staff training, to help prevent similar tragedies from happening.
That's good to hear. At least some positive action is coming out of this tragedy. But it doesn't bring Naa back. And it makes you wonder, what can we do as individuals to protect ourselves in a world where something as simple as accepting a drink can have such devastating consequences?
That's a question we'll definitely delve deeper into, because while it's crucial to hold perpetrators accountable and advocate for systemic change, personal vigilance is essential as well.
So let's talk about what we can do to protect ourselves. It's scary to think that we have to be so cautious in social settings, but it seems like the reality of the world we live in. Where do we even start?
You're right. It's a sad truth that we can't just assume our safety anymore. But knowledge is power, and being aware of the dangers is the first step in protecting ourselves.
Okay, so awareness is key. What else can we do? What about those drink covers we mentioned earlier? Do they actually work?
Drink covers can definitely be helpful. They act as a physical barrier, making it more difficult for someone to slip something into your drink unnoticed. Even if they don't completely prevent tampering, they can at least make it more obvious if someone tries to mess with your drink.
That makes sense. It's like a visual deterrent, a sign that you're being vigilant. Are there any other strategies we can use? What if drink covers aren't available?
One simple thing you can do is keep your hand over the opening of your drink. It might not be the most elegant solution, but it's an effective way to prevent someone from quickly adding something to your beverage when you're not looking.
It's like that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But what about if you do start feeling unwell? What are the signs that you might have been drugged?
That's a crucial point. The effects of these drugs can mimic the feeling of being drunk, but they often come on much faster and more intensely. If you suddenly feel dizzy, disoriented, or nauseous, especially if you've only had one drink, trust your instincts and seek help immediately. Don't let anyone convince you that you're just overreacting.
So it's better to be safe than sorry, even if it turns out to be nothing. But what if you're with friends and someone else starts acting strangely? What should you do?
Never leave a friend alone if they seem excessively intoxicated or out of it, especially if it's a sudden change. If they've only had one drink and are suddenly slurring their words or can't stand up straight, that's a huge red flag. Alert a bartender, security staff, or even call 911. Time is of the essence in these situations.
And this goes back to the importance of going out in groups and looking out for each other. It's not just about personal safety, it's about collective responsibility. We need to have each other's backs.
Absolutely. And it's important to create a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up if they see something suspicious. If you see someone being pressured to drink or someone looking visibly uncomfortable or distressed, don't hesitate to intervene or alert someone who can help.
You mentioned societal factors earlier. What role does our culture play in contributing to the problem of drug-facilitated crimes? Is there a connection between societal attitudes and the prevalence of these crimes?
That's a complex question, but it's an important one to address. Some experts believe that our culture's tendency to blame victims, particularly in cases of sexual assault, contributes to the underreporting of these crimes and makes it harder to hold perpetrators accountable.
So victims may be reluctant to come forward because they fear they won't be believed or that they'll be blamed for what happened. It's like they're being victimized twice.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to shift the focus from victim blaming to perpetrator accountability. We need to create a culture where victims feel safe and supported coming forward, and where perpetrators are held responsible for their actions regardless of the circumstances.
It sounds like there's a lot of work to be done to change those societal attitudes. But how do we even begin to tackle such a deeply ingrained problem?
It starts with education and awareness. We need to challenge the myths and misconceptions surrounding sexual assault and consent and promote a culture of respect and empathy. We need to teach young people about healthy relationships, boundaries, and the importance of consent.
It's about changing the narrative, shifting the conversation from what victims should do to prevent assault to what perpetrators should not do. It's about creating a culture where these crimes are not tolerated and where victims are believed and supported.
Precisely. And it requires a multifaceted approach involving education, advocacy, law enforcement, and societal change. It's a complex issue, but it's not an insurmountable one.
That's hopeful. But it also makes me think about Naa's case and how her story has brought so much attention to this issue. Her family's determination to get justice for her has really sparked a conversation about the dangers of drug-facilitated crimes and the need for change.
You're absolutely right. Naa's story has tragically become a catalyst for change, raising awareness about the prevalence of these crimes and the need for greater vigilance both on a personal and societal level. It's a legacy that, while heartbreaking, is incredibly powerful.
It's a reminder that behind the statistics, behind the headlines, there are real people, real families whose lives are forever changed by these crimes. It makes me think about the psychological impact on victims and their families. What kind of long-term effects do these crimes have?
The psychological scars left by drug-facilitated crimes can be profound and long-lasting. Victims often struggle with feelings of shame, guilt, and self-blame, even though they did nothing wrong. The loss of control, the inability to remember what happened, can be incredibly traumatizing.
It's like a violation on so many levels, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well.
Exactly. And these feelings can be compounded by the fact that these crimes are often underreported and difficult to prosecute, leaving victims feeling like they have nowhere to turn, no way to get justice.
It's a heartbreaking reality, and it makes you wonder what can be done to better support victims of these crimes? What resources are available to help them heal and cope with the trauma?
There are organizations and resources that specialize in supporting victims of sexual assault and trauma, offering counseling, advocacy, and legal aid. But we need to do more to make sure that these resources are accessible and readily available to all victims, regardless of their background or circumstances.
It's about creating a system of support that's compassionate, understanding, and empowering. A system that believes victims, validates their experiences, and helps them navigate the complex legal and emotional aftermath of these crimes.
You've summed it up perfectly. It's about creating a culture of support rather than a culture of silence and shame. It's about empowering victims to reclaim their lives and heal from the trauma.
And hopefully, by having these conversations, by raising awareness and demanding change, we can create a world where these crimes are less prevalent and where victims receive the justice and support they deserve.
That's the ultimate goal. It's about working together to create a safer, more just, and more compassionate society for everyone.
It feels like we've been talking about a lot of heavy stuff today, and it's easy to get overwhelmed and discouraged. But I think it's important to remember that there's still hope. There are people and organizations fighting to change the system, to support victims, and to prevent these crimes from happening in the first place.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the darkness of these cases, but it's important to remember that there are people working tirelessly to bring light to the issue and advocate for change.
So what are some of the things being done to make a difference? What gives you hope in this fight?
Well, for one, there's been a growing movement to train bar and restaurant staff to recognize the signs of potential drugging situations and to intervene appropriately. This can be as simple as offering a discreet way for someone to signal for help or stepping in to separate someone who seems to be in a vulnerable situation.
So it's about empowering the people who are on the front lines, the ones who are in a position to observe and potentially prevent these situations from escalating.
Exactly. And it's not just about bars and restaurants. Colleges and universities are implementing programs to educate students about consent, healthy relationships, and bystander intervention. These programs aim to shift the culture from one of silence and victim blaming to one of active prevention and support.
That's encouraging. It sounds like these initiatives are addressing the problem from multiple angles, which is what we need. But what about the legal side of things? Is there anything being done to make it easier to prosecute these cases?
There's definitely a push for legal reforms that would make it easier to hold perpetrators accountable for drug-facilitated crimes. Some advocates are calling for stricter penalties for those who use these drugs to commit crimes, while others are pushing for changes in the way evidence is collected and analyzed.
It sounds like a lot of this comes down to changing the way we think about and talk about sexual assault and consent. It's about challenging those deeply ingrained societal attitudes that often protect perpetrators and silence victims.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about shifting the burden of proof from the victim to the perpetrator. It's about believing victims and taking their experiences seriously. And it's about holding perpetrators accountable for their actions, regardless of whether the victim can remember every detail of what happened.
And it's about creating a culture where people feel empowered to speak up if they see something wrong, whether it's someone being pressured to drink or someone exhibiting signs of being drugged.
Absolutely. It's about bystander intervention, about creating a community of support and vigilance. It's about saying, we see you, we believe you, and we're not going to let this happen.
Before we wrap up, I want to circle back to Naa's case. Her story is a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of these crimes and the importance of fighting for justice.
Naa's case highlights the importance of never giving up hope, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Her family's relentless pursuit of justice has brought national attention to this issue and has undoubtedly saved lives by raising awareness and prompting preventative measures.
And it's a reminder that every single one of us has a role to play in creating a safer world. Whether it's educating ourselves about the dangers of drug-facilitated crimes, supporting organizations that advocate for victims, or simply speaking up when we see something that doesn't feel right, we can all make a difference.
You're absolutely right. Change starts with awareness, with conversation, and with action. Together, we can create a culture where these crimes are no longer tolerated and where victims receive the justice and support they deserve.
For our listeners, if you have any information about Naa Dromor Adjei's case, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem, please contact Crime Stoppers at 503-352-3040. You can remain anonymous. And remember, there are resources available if you or someone you know has been affected by a drug-facilitated crime. Don't hesitate to reach out for help. Naa's story is a tragedy, but it can also be a catalyst for change. Let's honor her memory by working together to create a safer world for everyone. True crime, no bull.